Welcome to the Self-Publishing Experience, the quarterly podcast about indie publishing from the team at Troubador Publishing. Here are your hosts, Stephanie Carr and Jeremy Thompson.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to this episode of the Self-Publishing Experience podcast. In this episode, we're going to be looking more closely at fiction, and romance fiction in particular, but we'll also be taking a look at audiobooks and trends in increasingly popular genres.
We hear from the Sunday Times best-selling author Jane Corry about her publishing journey, from Jude Hayland on her new novel Counting the Ways and her experience of promoting it using social media. Agent Kate Nash, we hear from on the trend for uplit, and Ian Nichols is also talking to us about recording his new audiobook Stand and Deliver.
As well as all that, we'll also be hearing from Louise about her brand new novel Free Fall in Stilettos.
So there's good news and bad news on book sales this month. The bad news is that sales of fiction in the UK were down a massive 9% in 2018, which is enormous. The reason, it seems, is the rise in the sheer amount of entertainment out there, with people having to make choices about what they spend their time on. Box sets seem to be crowding out reading fiction at the moment, and with so much original TV being produced by the likes of Netflix, Sky and Amazon, I guess something has to give. On the good news front, it's that non-fiction sales actually grew last year. Children's books are also holding their own, and digital sales are also slightly up. So overall, though UK books sales fell by around about 2% in 2018, down from 6 billion in 2017, it's not an enormous fall, but it's never really nice to see book sales falling.
It really isn't. But keeping in with the theme of this podcast, what does this mean for romance fiction in particular? Well, according to the Romantic Novelists Association, a romantic novel was purchased every 2 seconds in the UK in the first half of 2017, and romance fiction actually accounts for 13% of the total UK adult fiction market.
And 80% of the readers of romance fiction are women, and over 70% of them talk about and recommend the novels they're reading.
They're a very vocal group.
They are, indeed, yeah. And according to a report from Nielsen in 2016, which is the year for which we have the most recent figures, the romance genre is thriving, and there are so many subgenres to keep everybody happy, ranging from things like vampires to dragons, mystery, comedy, LGBT, historical romance, and many, many, many more. Really interestingly, Nielsen says that 24% of people discover their next romance read through in-store displays, and that's by far the largest route to discovery for this genre.
It's actually really interesting, isn't it, how diverse the romance genre has become in recent years. And we now don't only think of the romance genre as kind of bodice rippers, it's more escapism in any genre, but one where there's often a happy ending. And one author who's picked up on this is best-selling author Jane Corry, whose work has changed a lot over the years. She's moved away from conventional romance fiction, but still has a strong leading female in a modern psychological thriller. And this reflects the broadening of the romance genre that we've just been speaking about. She chatted to Jane Rowland about how this change happened, as well as discussing her publishing journey and her self-publishing experience.
I had written romance before, and that had petered out, and I'd been writing lots of short stories, but I really wanted to break through into the world of novels and be big, as it were. That sounds awful, but that was my aim. I really, really wanted to get up there in the charts. At the same time, my life took a nosedive in a way. So my first marriage ended after a long time, and it was at the same time a regular column of mine, writing for a women's magazine, ended. And I saw a job that was advertised in The Guardian, and it said wanted writer in residence of a high security prison. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but it paid to a penny exactly what I needed. And actually, it was the most inspirational job I've ever done. And it also changed my writing. So it made it darker. It made me understand the crime world, of which I'd known nothing before. After I'd been there for about 2 years, a friend of mine said, "Jane, you should write crime." And I said, "I don't know anything about crime." And she said, "But Jane, you work in a prison." So I thought, well, actually, I've always been very interested in emotions and challenges that strong women have to face. I wrote a novel about a young woman lawyer who goes into prison to handle a murderer's appeal. She's very nervous. So that was the first book, My Husband's Wife, which got to number 5 in the Sunday Times.
And so how did you go from the manuscript to having a published book?
I started writing the first 3 chapters of My Husband's Wife, and it's told from 2 different viewpoints. And I needed to just write those 3 chapters to see if it worked for me. I found an agent through a friend of a friend. I just actually sent her those first 3 chapters, and she said, yes, I love it, I'd like to take them on. And I said, yes, but what if you don't like the rest of the book? And she said, I will. So it was a gamble for her and a gamble for me, but it worked, and I was very lucky. One lesson I really would impart is honesty. And if you actually haven't written the rest of that novel, don't say that you have. And some agents actually will say, well, I'll look at it when you've written the whole book.
Did the book change significantly from submitting it to an agent to actually what was finally published?
Yes, it did actually. It was bought by Penguin, which was terribly exciting. And as soon as I met my editor, I knew I'd found a fit. She was absolutely brilliant. She understood my characters immediately. What I then found was something which I hadn't really had before. I had editorial notes, which is what you always get when you send your book in. My editor has a very, very good eye and actually asked me to change quite a lot.
Psychological thrillers are huge at the moment, aren't they? Why do you think that is?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? You see, I never saw myself as writing a psychological thriller. What I really wanted to write something where you had a strong woman who might not seem strong on the outside to be really challenged by something. I think psychological suspense are popular, and they have been for a very long time now, because people want to get into the depths of a character. They don't just want a thriller plot. You're not thinking about the character, you're just thinking about the action. I think they want to be able to savour that fear, also to be able to savour the ups and downs, and to really understand why a character might do what they're doing. And actually, over the last few years, since psychological thrillers began to be popular, I think they have changed. There's more emphasis now on why somebody did what they did, quite rightly, because that's what's very interesting to me.
You went through the agent and you were very lucky getting Penguin straight
Yes.
away. Had you dealt with much rejection before that? You said you used to write romance.
Yes, I had had a lot of rejection in the past, and it's part of it. I started writing, and so I then immediately got accepted by an agent. And I thought, well, that's marvellous. This is back in 1994, and she wasn't able to sell it. So I then wrote a book a year for 12 years before I got my first romance published. So I was very used to rejection. All through, I kept thinking, am I wasting my life here? What am I doing? Because in those days, self-publishing wasn't as common as it is now. It wasn't really an option.
And coming on to that point, how do you think self-publishing has changed the industry?
The only experience I've had of it myself is that before I got published with Penguin, I was really desperate to try and get something published. I had the rights back to some non-fiction books I'd written. So I thought I'll self-publish it, and I actually found it really hard to format it, and in the end paid somebody to do it. But I can tell you from the perception, as both a reader and a traditionally published author, I think it is not just more acceptable, but a very possible option. And I've also spoken to many editors in the past, friends of mine who are editors, who say that one of the first things they do in the morning is go and check out what's selling, especially my self-published authors, and then approach them.
So where do you get your ideas from? Do you get a character first or a story idea first?
I usually get the story idea first. I'll think very hard about the kind of characters that would work in that idea. I might even have them in my head already, but I will just get this idea. So the new book that comes out this summer is called I Looked Away, and it's about a granny who looks after her grandson. I couldn't have written that without being a granny. My main character, Ellie, also has a very dark past. Living by the sea, I didn't expect to find much homelessness, but there is. I like to get strong subjects in my book to make people socially aware of them. So one of my characters is homeless.
You've given me a postcard for
Yeah.
your latest book, which has got a beautiful, strong cover, which is obviously very on trend.
Yes.
Do you get a lot of say in how the book looks?
They're very good. They're very good, Penguin, and I'm absolutely thrilled with all the covers they come up with.
They all look really, not similar, but they're connected, aren't
Thank
they?
you, they
Which
are.
identify as a
Yes,
brand.
yes.
And author branding is really important in
It
this
is.
day and age.
It is. I mean, my author brand is that I write about families and relationships. I write about women in difficult positions. I like writing about women who perhaps might not think they're strong, but actually learn to be strong.
What trends do you think are coming up in writing at the moment?
Well, they're talking a lot about uplit, and in fact, I Looked Away has a lot of hope. So although it's a tough tale, there is hope and optimism at the end. And I think in a world where everything's changing, things are hard, we want to be entertained.
the difficult question. What advice do you give to people who are just starting out and want to become writers?
You might strike lucky, but if you don't give up, because it can take a very long time. Doesn't mean if you're rejected that you're no good. As I said earlier, a lot of it is the right time, it's where you have to be, and it's whether your book works. It might be that your idea is too similar. I would say though, if you get rejected, see whether you can get any kind of feedback. Not all agents have got the time to do that, but worth paying perhaps for a consultancy agency to have lots of different ways around this. But don't think that it's not going to happen. But having said that, look at your work, analyse it. Are you doing anything that's preventing you from being picked up? It's important for readers to be drawn into the character from the very beginning and also to be drawn into a situation very soon. Otherwise the plot is slow. Something needs to happen in every chapter. You need to have enough dialogue, you need to have enough setting. Have a look at your own manuscript if it's rejected and think, now what can I do to improve it? And read out aloud. One of the biggest tips I'd say is read out aloud, not from the screen, but from the printed page.
Thanks so much for talking to us today. It's been lovely to chat to you.
Thank you. It's been lovely to chat to you.
Jane Corry's latest book, I Looked Away, is published by Penguin this summer. Jane is the author of Sunday Times best-selling psychological thrillers My Husband's Wife, Blood Sisters and The Dead Ex.
We recently spoke to Kate Nash, who runs the Kate Nash Literary Agency, about the enduring genre that is romance fiction and how it's changed over the years. One of the things that Jane Corry also mentioned in her interview was uplit, something that we're hearing much more about in the industry. And Kate Nash also touches on this new trend. We spoke to her at the Self-Publishing Conference.
One of the publishers I was speaking to at the London Book Fair actually this year, in their catalogue has top page said escapist fiction, and all the books they're all romantic fiction, but they've rebranded it for the purposes of their marketing as escapist fiction, and that's what I think you have to look at romance as. It's as escapist as a really, thrilling crime novel, but for people that want a happy ending, big trend at the moment called uplit, which involves dealing with perhaps difficult topics like loneliness, but nobody wants a sad ending, and romance promises that happy ending, and I think that happy ending is at the moment very popular across lots of genres. Uplit is a big trend, and romantic fiction has been around forever, and it's going to be around forever, and it's, about 35%, 40% of the fiction market in total, so it is big. So I think it's definitely delivering that happy ending, and that's why readers love it.
So Uplit is all about novels that are optimistic, filled with everyday heroism, human connection and love, empathy, and they're supposedly a reaction against the recent years of political upheaval and economic uncertainty.
So in the mainstream books like Matt Haig's How to Stop Time, Gail Honeyman's Eleanor Oliphant's Completely Fine, both of those fall into the uplit category. And new releases this summer, for example, will be by Rowan Coleman of The Summer of Impossible Things, and also David M. Barnett, Calling Major Tom. They're all good examples of this sort of optimistic feel, uplit fiction. It's a strange term, but uplit fiction.
Exactly. Uplit fiction isn't something that I was really aware of until recently, but I find it really fascinating how suddenly there's a trend affecting what gets published and what starts to sell. So what has influenced that trend to catch on, and how are publishers so good at spotting trends?
Well, now that we're halfway through the publishing year, we thought it might be very useful to take a look at new and upcoming trends, some things that we spotted at Matador, with our own operations director, Jane Rowland.
It's very interesting hearing Jane Corry talk about uplift as a genre within women's publishing, but actually also within publishing, uplift can be applied to pretty much all fiction genres, and that got me thinking about the conversations I've been having this year at various publishing events and what people felt were going to be interesting or upcoming genres or topics that were going to capture the readers' imaginations. So what I've already noticed, we've got the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood coming out in 2019, and so there's already many more books around feminine dystopia. This has also been fed into by the Me Too movement, I think. There's a big diversity movement in publishing as well at the moment. They're trying to get a lot of new voices so that everybody is represented in books and publishing. There's also been quite a notable uplift in genres such as the retelling of myths and folklore. Some really big sellers from Achilles' Song, Circe, The Silence of the Girls by Pat Baker, which won some awards this year and are all retellings of Greek myths There's also been Catherine Arden's books, the Winter Night trilogy, which are re-examining Russian myths and folklore with a really strong female lead character. In non-fiction, we are very much looking at lifestyle, living a good life, positivity, well-being. There's a lot of focus on mental health and living your best life at the moment, and dieting books continue to do really well. In fact, in 2019, Pinch of Nom has gone on to be the fastest selling non-fiction book ever published, and it remains at the top of the bestseller charts, and that is all about cooking well, dieting, and that is a phenomenal seller at the moment. Elsewhere, veganism is a big theme, and it's very reflected in publishing at the moment. A lot of vegan cookbooks or vegan advice books. And in children's books, I think we can expect to see diversity, diverse characters increasing. Children's and young adults fiction is already tackling many more complicated topics than perhaps it did some years ago. But I think we can go back to a more traditional topic as well, with the 50th anniversary of the moon landing happening in July. I think we'll see an increased publishing through space adventure, fact and fiction in the children's market.
So there's some fairly strong trends there that include both uplit and romance. And one self-published Matador author who has taken advantage of both of these trends is Catherine Louise. Her new book, Free Fall in Stilettos, was released back in April, and Andrea Johnson chatted to her about how she got the idea for the book.
I'm here talking to Catherine Louise about her new title, Free Fall in Stilettos. Tell me a bit about the book. Where did you get your ideas from?
I started it one day when I was actually ill and I couldn't work. I was working on the airlines. I was on a stopover somewhere in France at the time, and I just started to write some ideas down on this pad. And then I continued for a while, and then I put it away. I got to around about 15,000 words when I typed it up. I never really got much further than that. It was in my 30s when I picked it up again, and I found it one day, and I thought, I think now is the time to do something with this, or I'm never actually going to do anything. And so I thought, I think I could put a story together here. I don't think you can help putting, well, I couldn't help putting a part of myself in the book, but you're trying to create the characters at the same time. I thought, romance story, I like reading romances, so I turned it into a romance, and then I just used some experiences and other things that I just thought about and tried to make a story really that hopefully other people would like to read.
So where did you get your ideas for the characters? How did they develop?
I think it's working with people and finding people interesting with, especially romance. There can be a big strapping hero. Well, I thought I'm not going to create something that's a bit of a cliche, if you like. My character had big teeth, and the heroes in real life are pretty ordinary, and unless you're really, really lucky. So I turned him into something ordinary in a way, but he was still French, so he had an interesting, something of interest, I suppose.
How did you find the submitting process?
I did try the traditional route, because I always thought of self-publishing as being vanity publishing, if you like, something that you only really did if maybe you couldn't go down the traditional route. And it was only when I went to Bubble Cow, they helped with the developmental edit, they said, have you thought about self-publishing? It was only really when it was pointed out to me like that, I thought, why don't I do it this way then? There's a lot of people doing it now, and it's not regarded in the same way that maybe it was at one time. And it's a way to just get your book out there and keep control of it, rather than handing it over to somebody else to give them control, and then they maybe change aspects that you don't want to have changed, and you've got to fit in with their criteria. So, and also you can get on with it rather than trying to send out letters, get a load of rejections back, because that's the reality. I did get a couple of offers actually, but I didn't think they were very good. So I went down the self-publishing route, and I'm really pleased that I did.
When you came to the actual production of the book, did you know what you wanted the cover to be?
I knew what I wanted the cover to look, because I'd already had the cover designed by a graphic designer. He did a stiletto shoe, which I loved, and I really liked what he did. When I sent it to you, the feedback that came back was, maybe it needs to be of better quality for the type of book, and we know what works with the retailers and what doesn't. And I thought, well, I don't know, I still like that red shoe, you're going to have to convince me. And when I got the cover design back, it wasn't what I'd expected, but I really liked it. So
brilliant.
I did, I really liked it. It just fitted with my story. The red character falling through the clouds, I thought, yeah, it's got the airline in it, it had a little aeroplane and the heart, and I thought it summed up what the book was about for me, I think, just on that picture. So no, I loved it.
You've mentioned that you like reading romance fiction.
Yeah,
is that your favourite book to read?
It's probably what I pick up because my time to read books is pretty limited. I don't get to read as much as I would like to. It tends to be when I go on holiday. It's when I'm at the airport usually. If I'm at the airport, that's when I'll pick up my book, and I usually want something that's quite easygoing that I think I'm going to enjoy for the week. Yeah, I love the stuff like Jojo Moyes does. And I suppose that's what I've tried to do myself, really. I've written something that I thought other people might like, but I didn't have a particular audience in mind. I just wrote what I would enjoy, and that's what I did.
Are you doing a second book?
I've started.
You started? Is it same genre? Are you still going down the romance route? Or
I'm going to try and do a sequel. I don't know, but we'll see and how many years it takes me. I've got no idea. But, I've started it.
See what happens.
As Catherine talked about how her book cover came about, we thought it could be interesting to have a chat with Jack Wedgbury, the senior designer at Matador, to see how that design actually came together.
So the cover design for Freefall and Stilettos was passed over to me because our initial inquiries team had advised the author that we could improve on the quality of the design. The supply design was based solely around a large photograph of a red stiletto, which told only part of the story, and from our point of view it wasn't quite right for the book. The stiletto gave the book a strong erotic fiction feel, but it's also a light-hearted and fun romance which the draft didn't portray. Whilst the author still wanted the new design to feature an image of stiletto, she was open to our suggestions, which is always exciting to hear. My role was to take the initial idea and reimagine it in a way that would make it more appropriate for the book and more commercially appealing. I felt a more illustrated approach would work well, and so the first thing I did was to research an image for the cover. I also wanted to incorporate a travel element into the design. To do this, I added a small aeroplane into the background, flying in between the text and images. In terms of the colour palette, I was keen to work with a simple palette of black, white, red and pink for two reasons. First, it was appropriate for the romance genre and quite on trend, and secondly, the palette also featured in Catherine's supply draft, but I just felt that it needed to be tweaked to make it stronger and more eye-catching. When we sent the new draft to the author, the feedback was really positive, and despite it being so different to what she was expecting, Catherine liked the design and said that it captured the essence of her story in an intriguing way. She especially loved the pink background with the pop of red against it and the introduction of the aeroplane. The only change that she wanted to make was to try a slightly more rounded font for the title, which we then did for comparison. But in the end we reverted back to the original as the strong black title worked well to grab your attention, and the cover was then approved. I think that this was a good example where we've used our knowledge of cover design to give the author a cover that really improved the commercial appeal of their book.
And now some news from the publishing world.
Seemingly at odds with our early news that people are watching more box sets comes the news that last year Netflix bought the rights to 50 literary projects. Most of the books bought are destined apparently to be turned into TV series, and just a few supposedly being bought for feature film adaptation. There's also talk of Netflix executives attending literary events, including the London Book Fair, to look for likely books that could be adapted, so keep your eyes peeled.
And for all writers, there's a new exhibition at the British Library that explores the history of writing. So looking at writing tools and media over the centuries, the exhibition argues that writing and tools for writing have always changed, and that recent fears over handwriting becoming a lost art are unfounded. At the exhibition, you'll be able to see everything from a 3,000-year-old Egyptian tablet through to the earliest Bic biros and even an Apple Mac II computer, demonstrating the changing form of writing.
I'm sure they're right that writing itself in the form of sort of stringing words together won't ever disappear, but the art of handwriting, that's writing by hand, surely that's something that's on decline. If I think about how often I actually write something with a pen and paper now compared just to 20 years ago, it must be far, far less. Changes in technology happening so rapidly, will there continue to be the need for pen and paper? That's a rhetorical question, by the way. Don't answer that, because who knows? I don't know. I'm going to see that exhibition later this month, so I'll report back.
And news this month of another retailer sale. This time Barnes & Noble in the US is up for sale, and it's likely to be bought by the company that owns Waterstones. And there's even a good chance that the Waterstones MD, James Dawn, will run both companies. Now, the move has actually been largely welcomed by publishers, as it would enable them to continue to sell their print books on the high streets.
But there is also speculation that Barnes & Noble might have to close their troubled Nook ebook business, which has been ailing for quite some time now, apparently. And so it's not just print books that are suffering.
And nearer at home, at WH Smith's, the chain has announced plans to make itself the home of books for children, education books, and books for lighter readers. And they're going to be removing many of their backlist titles. However, the chain also recently announced that it would also be welcoming local authors in store to do signings for the first time in many years. And this is an initiative that we've already seen working really well for many of our self-publishing authors at Matador.
I think Smiths have let their books offering drift for quite some years, actually, and relying too heavily on blockbusters and ignoring the enormous pool of local authors. Time was many years ago that they used to welcome authors with open arms, but it's been a blank period for authors in store. But hopefully now their about face will benefit indie authors, because branches now seem to be welcoming all authors with open arms, and at last they're recognising the potential of local as well as national sales.
Matador author Jude Hayland recently published Counting the Ways, a novel set on an isolated Greek island. As a complete novice to social media, she took the bull by the horns and really got stuck in. I chatted to her about her self-publishing journey and how using social media has really helped her to promote her work. One of my favourite aspects of the book personally were the different settings. So we go from London to a more rural setting in Oxford, and then across to a Greek island. Is travel something that you're passionate about? And is the Greek island in the book inspired by anywhere that you've been yourself?
The Greek island is entirely influenced by Crete. I do spend a lot of the year there. So that somehow became an essential part of the book. I wanted to be able to create and invent villages, towns. I also wanted my island only to be reached by ferry, because there are several key moments which make it more isolated. And Crete has 3 airports, so that wouldn't work at all.
And speaking of the island being isolated, I know that it was important to you that the novel was set in a time before social media and instant communication took over. But from a marketing perspective, you're actually very active on social media yourself. What have your experiences of social media marketing been?
It was really difficult for me to get involved in social media. I'm of an age for which it doesn't come naturally at all. So it was a huge effort to set up a Twitter account, but I just knew I had to do it. It was essential. At first I had 6, 7, 8 followers, and I've still not got huge numbers by any means, but I have found it has created an awareness of the fact that I'm a writer, and that is very exciting, and it's also something that we have to use. I'm being told, why aren't you all using social media? It's free. And of course it's very obvious, but you don't really think about it. Facebook came a little bit more naturally because I already had a Facebook account. So that has been very directly influenced, I think, people buying and talking about my book. Because I got the connections in Crete, I had a book launch there. People connected with me in Crete who I might not have known, and I could tell them about the book launch. It's been helpful there in publicity. I think it's also helpful, particularly Twitter, just connecting with other writers, sharing events, ideas. I've picked up chances to appear at other published writers' book fairs, simply through Twitter. Events that I wouldn't have known about at all. And I think it's essential.
Moving on slightly, as well as teaching English and drama, you've actually been writing women's fiction as well since the 80s for various magazines. How did writing a novel compare to writing fiction for magazines?
I'd always wanted to write a novel. I started writing short fiction when I started teaching. Was setting compositions and essay tasks for the class. And then I suddenly thought, I want to write a story too. So that's how I got into writing short stories. And then a magazine published one, I got an agent, and that started that process. But always in the back of my mind, I wanted to write a novel. But there never seemed enough time. I then did an MA in creative writing at Winchester University. And it was that gave me the confidence to think I could possibly do it. It was wonderful writing a novel compared with writing a short story for a magazine, because the magazine short stories were pretty prescriptive. There were requirements that it always needed an upbeat ending, that only certain subjects were included, never do anything too dark. So it made you economical with language, and I think that taught me a skill. But having the expansiveness of 100,000 words or more for a novel has been wonderful.
And with self-publishing, did you like the fact that you had the freedom to take the book in whatever direction you wanted?
Yes, to me it's the ideal combination, because I wanted to have artistic freedom. It sounds a bit pompous, but I suppose that's what it is. And I've heard so many stories of agents and conventional publishing trying to get the right of virtue to rewrite what they've done. I knew I couldn't self-publish myself. I wanted it to be professional. I wanted it to look as good, in fact, better, as I think Matador books do look even better.
Thank you.
Well, it's true, than a lot you see. But I'm hopeless technologically, and I wanted the experts and professionals' help to do it. So to me, it was the ideal combination.
And to round off, in terms of marketing, it's often something that authors don't consider as much as they should. What advice would you give to authors who may be struggling to know where to start in terms of marketing and promoting their own work?
I would give the advice that I'm going to take next time, and that I didn't do the first time, which is to start before the book is published.
Yes, absolutely.
And I didn't do that. Definitely, my second book is finished now, and hope it will be published relatively soon. But next time I would think about getting reviews ahead of time, holding back the actual publication date before it had some reviews. I would spend as much money as I possibly could on it without going over the top. But I would also have more confidence in taking part in events, in maybe doing a podcast, a book promotion video.
The recent self-publishing conference at the University of Leicester included a helpful session on public speaking for authors. And when you think about it, speaking in public is something that authors will have to do at some stage, whether that's at a new book launch or at a literary festival or maybe even at an award ceremony.
Ian Nichol self-published his book Stand and Deliver last year, but this year he released the audiobook edition. We caught up with him after his session at the conference, and we asked him about why he decided to release an audiobook.
So your book is available as printed book, ebook and an audiobook. Was it important to you to have the book available on as many different formats as possible?
Absolutely. I did a bit of research and became aware of the huge boom in the popularity of audiobooks with the rise of the internet, the development of audio technology. So you've got a whole new audience out there whose first port of call is the audiobook, not a written text. I wanted to make my book available to those people. It was very exciting to be the first person to do it with Matador, and it certainly helps that the book is read by Philip Law, who's a professional actor. I think he's done a tremendous job. He's also got a much nicer, more interesting voice than I have.
How did you find the audiobook production process?
It was quite demanding. I got to grips with the technicalities as a sort of Luddite in technical terms reasonably well. The big challenge really is to go through in very painstaking detail, listening to his reading of the book, trying to come up with just the occasional suggestion for how it might be done differently, paying great attention to the individual words being in the right order. And it took about 20 hours to listen to everything he'd said, and another sort of 5 to 10 to go back with comments, and then some more time to listen to the end result. So it was a week or two out of my life, but it was a highly enjoyable and very worthwhile week or two.
Was there something that you were surprised at how maybe it didn't translate very well as an audiobook?
There are some jokes in dialect or some particular references that fall very flat. So in the book I do a Cockney story from about 1900 I think, reads in print quite interestingly and funnily. When read out by a modern actor, it just sounds very patronising. So that's gone. Whereas the book is sort of theoretically unabridged. It's been abridged for about 100 words out of quite a lot of thousands of words.
That's all for this edition of the Self-Publishing Experience podcast. Look out for our next edition coming in the early autumn, where among other things we'll be looking at crime fiction with best-selling crime author Stephen Booth. So until next time, goodbye.
You've been listening to the Self-Publishing Experience. Learn more about indie and self-publishing at our website, troubador.co.uk.